to understand why culture happens at all. And that's going to be the key to understanding why it changes. Because if you compare, I honestly think this is going to be, the next big thing in the humanities is going to be the dehumanizing or the meta-humanizing of the humanities and the realization in order to understand ourselves, we've got to embrace the context of other animals, especially those that are critically like us in the respects that we study in the humanities, which are cultural respects. And I mean, stop me if you've heard this before. Because obviously this is well-known. These are well-known facts that they're an essential part of the story that I have here today. This discovery that there are non-human cultures really happened in 1953. It took a long time ago. People kind of take the implications on board. And it happened amongst macaque monkeys in Japan, where primatologists observed an individual female, 2-year-old female macaque monkey whom they called Emo, washing a sweet potato. And that was surprising because up till then, as far as primatologists had seen, chimpanzees just scraped the dirt off with their fingers. But Emo discovered that you could get the dirt off by washing the sweet potato. And the primatologists observed her teaching first her mother, then other members of her family, and then who in turn taught other members of the tribe. And this practice of washing the sweet potato became universal amongst the macaque tribe and has continued to be passed down across the generations to this day. And it's very clear, not for practical reasons, because the monkeys will insist on washing the sweet potato before they eat it, even if you give it to them ready washed. So it is a kind of social ritual. I mean, they do it not in order to wash the sweet potato, they do it because it's a tradition in their tribe, and they've been taught to do it by their predecessors. It's no more functional than it is for us to say grace before them. So this is unquestionably a cultural practice. And since then, I don't want to bore you with too many examples. I've got a lot to get through in a relatively short amount of time. But obviously chimpanzees are the best example because they are, other animals, the closest surviving, other surviving species, extant species. They are the closest to us in evolutionary terms, and have attracted a lot of study. I mean, there's even now a subdiscipline. Is this represented in amongst the departments of McGill University? There is now a subdiscipline of chimpanzee archaeology. There really are guys who dig under chimpanzee camps to try and find evidence of cultural change. We even have a lot of evidence about orangutan culture, which is pretty impressive because they're of other great apes, we've always thought they were the least social. They're low cultural because they tend to spend long periods in solitude. That's what Rousseau was thinking of when he postulated a pre-social phase of the past of humankind. He cited the behavior of what he called gorillas, but the taxonomy wasn't very well elaborated in Rousseau. So he was talking about orangutans. And we now know, that orangutan cultures diverge. You can tell whether a practice is cultural by whether it's different in different communities in the same environment. And some orangutans in Sumatra and Borneo have some kinds of games, and others have other. The environment's the same, so they've developed those cultural divergences for themselves. And here's one of the latest examples. Capuchin monkeys are now universally accepted as being cultural animals. Here you can see one of them performing one of their practices, which is cracking nuts. I'll skip some of the further illustrations in the interest of saving time. I'll just focus on one aspect of non-human culture, and I think is critical for my purpose, and that's political. Because once we've appreciated that other animals have culture, the question becomes, is there anything different about us that differentiates us from our cultural customs in the animal kingdom? And the obvious thing is that when they have culture and we have a lot more of it. Because in human society, cultures diverge and multiply, the forms of culture have become mutually more varied. Beyond all comparison with the relative homogeneity of all other non-human animal cultures. We have thousands of forms of culture, we have thousands of ways of eating and worshipping and organising society and obtaining resources from the environment and technologies and you name it. We've just got so much cultural variety. Whereas typically other cultural animals do have a certain amount of divergence, have reached a certain amount of divergence in the course of their history, but within a very much narrower range than we. I think politics is a great example of this, because on the whole, whereas we have thousands of ways of organising political life, other cultural species, at least the ones we know about, other primates, have pretty much only one political system, which is the rule of the alpha male and his cronies. And so far, only two exceptions are known. Only two cases are known where you can observe a primate society shifting from the rule of the alpha male to some other kind of political system. And one of them was in the 1980s amongst baboons, and this is a famous case because the alpha male and his cronies perished as a result of raiding human food dump and poisoning themselves. And the baboons then extemporized a new way of running their society, which was much more kind of egalitarian, and very interestingly included empowering female baboons. That's, I think, one of the reasons why we know a lot about this example, because it's going to get feminists latched onto it. It's really exceptionally interesting primate behavior, which they wished to see replicated in their own species. And the other case is this. This is it's a case from the 1960s in Tanzania, where Jane Goodall's project was observing a tribe of chimps that was run by an alpha male in the usual way. But there was this rather feeble but intellectual, professorial chimp, whom they called Mike, who grew very restive under the rule of the alpha male. And one day he went to the primatologist's camp, he pinched a couple of these big cans which they stored their food, and he went through the forest, banging these cans together, and running up and down the privileged routes which were reserved for the alpha male and his cronies. And the alpha male and his cronies were so shocked and fazed by Mike's behavior that they surrendered power to him, and he ruled that tribe for 6 years. Now these cases, I think if we saw something similar happening in a human environment, we would call them political revolutions. Because not only did the leadership change, the method by which the leader was chosen or emerged changed. And that, I think, shows that although we've got more cultural diversity than other cultural creatures, there's considerable potential for a lot of diversity amongst us. After all, human societies used to have the same system, I think, ruled by the alpha male, as far as we know, and yet we kind of gradually develop all kinds of other ways, choosing leaders. Sometimes, you know, for their wisdom or their charisma or heredity, or even, you know, even in some cases election. This does seem very odd. But it's a difference of degree. It's obviously an enormous difference of degree. But I think that's got to be our starting point. I think if we observe other animals behaving in this way and experiencing this kind of cultural divergence, we'd immediately say, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we'd immediately say, we've got to be able to explain this in terms of evolution or environmental combination of the two. They're obviously not easily separable concepts. But I don't think either type of explanation, either approach to an explanation is adequate. Partly for this reason, I'm terribly sorry, it's very vulgar of me to find one of my own books. But I don't think environment is responsible. Because in this book, this was an attempt to approach the history of the world biome by biome, instead of, you know, looking at the history of the world period by period, or civilization by civilization, or culture by culture, or region by region, or country by country, any of the usual categories. I thought, what would the history of the world look like if we used biomes as our category of analysis? And I think I found that even in identical or very similar environments, humans' cultures diverge tremendously. And therefore those divergences cannot depend, they certainly can't be determined by, I'm not saying they're not conditioned by environment, they clearly can't be determined by environment. If we look at, you know, as far as you can separate evolutionary from environmental explanations, I think this is a fairly comprehensive analysis of the kinds of explanation which are on the table, evolutionary explanations which are on the table for cultural change. It'd be very boring to go through all these one by one. If anybody wants to talk about them in particular, obviously you can come back to them later. But I just want to suggest to you, I think I've got 5 reasons why all of these explanations, the ones that I put in brackets at the end, I think are complete rubbish. I think there's some usefulness in the others. But I think even the most useful are very limited in helping us understand cultural change. For I would say 5 main reasons. And none of these reasons is decisive, but I think together they amount to a very strong caution against assuming that evolution is the right explanation. The first of these, first of my 5 reasons, is very obvious. It's that the range of human cultural diversity is tremendous, whereas the range of human genetic diversity is tiny. Actually, we're one of the most consistent, genetically consistent species on the planet. And therefore, there's a kind of mismatch. There's what I hesitate after hearing Jose Juan's talk yesterday, I hesitate to call this incommensurability between the amount of variation you get in the human genome and the amount of variation you get in human culture. Then there's a similar mismatch in the pace of change. I'm sorry, this is a pretty crummy graphic, but I squeezed a couple of letters together, really just to show that we don't assume that evolution is a process which is a consistent case. Everybody, I think, nowadays recognizes that punctuated equilibrium occurs in the course of evolutionary change. But the point is that it is a relatively constant process with elements of uniformity that you just don't find in the extraordinarily volatile world of cultural change. And my third reason is that as far as we can tell, the problem that I've highlighted today, why does cultural change accelerate, cannot be solved by reference to evolution, because as far as we know, acceleration isn't something that happens in the evolution of organisms. You know, one of Richard Dawkins's main ambitions has been to prove that biological evolution does experience accelerations, but the most research I've relying here mainly on those from Lachmann, who I think shown decisively really that if you look at the evidence in the fossil record, whenever you do accelerations in the evolutionary record, they lead to extinction. They very rarely have they're very rarely evolutionarily functional. And in any case, if it were true that you could explain culture in evolutionary terms, those terms would have to be Lamarckian and not Darwinian or neo-Darwinian, because Darwin himself never said this, but according to the neo-Darwinian consensus, with a very few marginal exceptions, you can't have acquired characteristics being transmitted genetically. They've already got to be, there's already got to be a random mutation in the genes of an anterior generation in order for that mutation to get passed to subsequent generations. Whereas culture can be, in fact is, definable as the transmission of acquired characteristics. People or macaque monkeys or whatever learn to do something new and pass that on by example or teaching to other members of the community. And my final reason is, I think, pretty good one. If you accept the premise on which you think, which is that I think, I mean, my lifetime as a historian hasn't taught me much. But if there's one thing I think I've learned, it is that the most widely adopted features of culture are dysfunctional. That's to say, they tend to lead to the extinction of the society, or the unrecognizable transformation of the societies that adopt them. Whereas the whole premise, of Darwinianism is that a successful mutation is successful genetic mutation is successful because it conduces to the survival of the species concerned, or in the submission of some biologists such as Dawkins, to the survival of the gene concerned, and that usually implies the survival of the species, because the species are the eco-niches which they do thrive. Whereas in culture, the opposite is true. That's why history is a path to possibility, and why most cultures are extinct, and why I don't have a great deal of optimism about the survival of life. And if you think about it, what are the cultural practices that have been very successful in the sense of being very widely adopted by human societies? And things like you can make out a case to say that war is good. On the whole, I would say it's dysfunctional. It tends to undermine and very often extinguish people practices. Agriculture is a great example. That's one of the most successful cultural adaptations. I mean, almost every society that's had the opportunity to adopt it has done so. almost invariably with disastrous consequences. The really long-lived societies are those that have resisted adopting these techniques. And you know, one could multiply the examples. I'll probably have to multiply it because I'm sure not everyone will be satisfied with it. But anyway, taking all of those, so take those five ways, I think they amount to a pretty strong cautionary admonition about being glib about describing cultural change through evolutionary causes. But we can't eliminate evolution from any analysis of behavior in any species, including our own. No species is exempt from evolution. It really is the way organisms change. And it really does limit what any particular organism can do. I mean, we can only do things, we can only behave in a way that evolution allows. So we have to ask, what is it in evolution that predisposes us to be cultural and equips us to change more than other cultural species? What I want to propose in a few minutes remaining for me is, I think there are lots of elements in what might be a complete answer to this, but I think there are two human factors, the evolution of which is absolutely critical to understanding our propensity to change. And the first of those is anticipation, which is really a faculty of seeing what isn't there, seeing what isn't there yet. That's how I would define anticipation. I think we've got this because I don't want to go back, talking about man the hunter, but I do want to go back to talking about the human hunter. I mean, any foraging and especially any hunting species has to have an evolved faculty of anticipation, because you've got to anticipate where the prey is going to be and where the rival predators are going to be. And notice, this is a pretty key element here, because this helps to explain why we have more anticipation than other primates, because as far as we know, we're the only primate with 100,000, excellent primate, with 100,000 years, 150,000, maybe 200,000 years of history as foragers and hunters. Because although chimpanzees and bonobos now hunt, or some of them, we've no evidence that they started that practice until the 1960s. And I suspect that they became hunters because of evolutionary pressures which we had induced in their environment. These are pictures of forests. I mean, this anticipation is equally important in savanna environments in which humans, Homo sapiens, emerged in the evolutionary record. And the other faculty that I think is critical is memory, which is also a faculty of seeing what isn't there. Anticipation, seeing what isn't yet there, and memory is the faculty of seeing what isn't there anymore. And we have a very well-developed faculty of anticipation by comparison with comparable species. And we tend to congratulate ourselves on having fantastic memories. In fact, we tend to congratulate ourselves on our superiority to other animals in every respect. But what I want to recommend to you, ladies and gentlemen, is just a moment's objectivity. And actually, our memories, well, I was going to use a word which perhaps would sully these hallowed halls, but I was going to say our memories are crap. Difficulty I'm having remembering what I was going to say in this lecture. Here's a great illustration. This is painted by my fellow countryman, Salvador Dali, and it's called The Persistence of Memory. But of course that's one of Dali's jokes, because that's not what it's about at all. It's about how memory fades and degrades. In the background you've got this very vague blur, which is what memory becomes. It's got an eroded cliff which are expressive the way memory erased, or this blank scene which it dissolves. You've got a withered tree, memory withers. You've got all these, timepieces which are buckling and sagging with the passage of time, just as occurs with memory. You've got moth and rust bugs corroding memory. In the foreground, you've got this sort of monster, which is, as you know, based on a Bosch monster, and that's what happens. Our memories do become monsters. They do transform into things in which the prototype, which the original, becomes unrecognizable by means of distortion. I just think that really expresses all our experience of memory. If you think your memory is reliable, tell us. And as soon as you tell us that, you undermine your own credibility, because we all know our memories are actually very unreliable. I need to go into all the forensic evidence, do I? Or appeal to the movies of Kurosawa, or all the sort of literary insights into this. But also, I do insist on something which isn't widely recognized, which is our memories are very inferior by comparison with other species. I think you can verify this anecdotally if you have dogs. But there's been a lot of scientific work on chimpanzee and gorilla memories. Has anybody played the video game Ape? I'm looking at David because he's a technical wizard. I can't play video games. I'm technologically incompetent. But there's a very popular game which was actually inspired by a series of scientific experiments with a chimpanzee, famous chimpanzee Pansy, and famous gorilla called King, who proved to be much better at a lot of admittedly short-term memory tests than human subjects. So we are very well equipped in anticipation. We're very badly equipped in memory. But remind you, these are very similar faculties because they're both faculties of seeing what is inferred. And indeed, neuroscientists like Daniel Schechter, measure what goes on in the brain when we remember things, and all the stuff that happens, which clearly has a distorting effect on the memories themselves, happens in the same areas of the brain that are activated by synaptic firing and the release of proteins when we imagine things. So these faculties are very closely aligned to imagination in a way. I think imagination is the product of anticipation, because imagination is seeing things that aren't there in a very general way, just as anticipation and memory about seeing things that aren't there in very particular ways. And the consequence of our having good anticipation, bad memory, is that we are exceptionally imaginative. There is something special about human beings, and God knows I don't think we're all that special, speaking for myself, not for you ladies and gentlemen, I can see you're all terribly special. If there is something special, we're very imaginative. As far as we can tell, there are great chimpanzee artists, supposedly, at least there's one at least famous Congo, who's one of whose paintings was sold for $20,000 in 600. But we don't really know. I don't have time to go into this, but there's no really strong evidence that their imaginations are anything like as productive as ours. And the result of our having imagination is ideas. Ideas, I submit, are products essentially of imagination. And I think what makes us culturally very muted is that we reimagine we see it as it isn't. And then we work to realize those reimagined worlds. And that's what drives the mutability of our cultures. That's the case that I want to suggest to you today. And it happens in a way because ideas, well, I take this phrase from a fellow scholar whom I've criticized a great deal in the past, Ridley, this phrase of ideas breed, by which I think Ridley means I accept this as true, that when ideas influence each other, they produce new ideas. I've got a silly diagram, to suggest this. It's not a difficult notion to grasp. In other words, change proceeds from interchange. And the more exchange of ideas you have, a faster, more frequent accelerations of culture become. And that's what we're experiencing now, whereas, isolation breeds stagnation. Jared Diamond's theory of why Eurasia and cultures change and all this and other parts of the world is a very good example of this. This is my attempt to represent that theory diagrammatically. You see why these Eurasian cultures all overlap and in constant contact with each other. That promotes change within those societies, whereas where you've got equally intelligent people with equally ancient civilizations in other parts of the world which aren't unusual, you get relative stagnation. Jared Diamond's famous example of New Guinea, where they're still doing slash and burn agriculture, even though they invented agriculture just as long ago, pretty much as any other society in the world. Right, I've got to finish now, so I can't go through all these rather delightful examples that I was going to use to haven't so, but in the circumstances that we're in now, in these circumstances of very exceptionally rapid, volatile mutability, in which people are disturbed by the pace of cultural change, the great danger is that they'll reach for the solutions of the noisy community. Well, that's why I think the obligation to explain change, explain the rapidity of current change, isn't just an academic obligation. It's really vital good that we can deliver for the societies that we inhabit. If we can reassure why these changes happen, we can exempt the false elements such as the immigrants. I think that will conduce to peace. Otherwise, this will go on happening. You'll see ever more conflicts being vested in people like this, and this, and this. I want to leave you with two possible sources of consolation. First comes from systems theory. Here's a very complex system. This is a cell. And broadly speaking, when you get a very volatile situation in a complex system, there are two possible outcomes. One is that the whole thing will collapse. But the other is that the very complexity of the interconnections, interdependencies that constitute the system means that it will go on functioning in spite of stresses which rupture parts of the structure. And maybe, our world's like this. But perhaps that's not all that concerning, because maybe it isn't. So here's my final conclusion. And I'm not, predicting that we're going to return to the canons of the ancients. Nor am I advocating ape power as a solution to our problems. Right? Just suppose that I've been right so far. Suppose I'm right when I suggest that the mutability of human culture, the divergences of human culture, are a product of, in part at least, of faculties evolved in the course of our hunting past. And if I'm right that chimpanzees probably don't have anything like such a long hunting past, they've only just begun to embark on the kind of history that we've had for the last couple of 100,000 years since Homo sapiens emerged in the fossil record. The consequence of this is that I give them another 100,000 years, and they may replicate other aspects of our history. They will certainly develop more acute factors of anticipation in the course of our hunting future. I know it may take 100,000 years, and I do think one of the practices I would recommend to anybody dabbling in futurology is make your predictions sufficiently remote in the future that you don't survive to see them falsified. I give these chimpanzees 100,000 years, and it may be, I dare not say we're going to end up on the planet of the apes. There are all sorts of reasons why probably human culture will continue to be more varied than that of chimpanzees if we survive for another 100,000 years. So I'm not predicting a return to the planet of the apes, but it may be that in given time we will find ourselves inhabiting a world in which the kind of cultural diversity, the degree of cultural diversity which is still unique to us, may begin to be shared more widely on our planet with other species.
Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
It's such a pleasure to hear thinking untrammeled, and one of the things you know about historians and literary scholars and art historians is we tend to be very fastidious and careful and footnote every single thing that we do and not to think boldly, and you combine a kind of tremendous scholarship and also an incredible intellectual reach. So I just wanted to say that it's a real pleasure to stimulation. I also have many questions. I usually think of culture as a bulwark against change and a bulwark of our recognition of our deep similarity to our the non-human animals. Culture as an instrument of stability and stillness rather than as something that is folded into the change that is the condition of being in nature. So, and I'm not saying that culture is not what you're saying, but how do you accommodate this other idea of culture?
Well, thank you very much. Well, I accommodate it very easily. That's a very common perception, and that's why, when confronted by evidence of rapid and transformative cultural change, we tend to worry, and we do respond with anxiety. But I'm sure that if you look across your own work, you'll see that what you're doing, this is very cheeky and impertinent of me to tell you what you're doing, but I'm pretty sure, that